Hey everybody, welcome back to a new episode of D&D Quick Shots. Once again, I am Brandon, and today we're going to talk about better tips for role-playing. At least 3 of them is we're going to talk about. We might get into a little more, so stay tuned. This is the bread and butter of D&D, but often I find that it is players just reacting to the DM and not really getting into character. It's a difficult thing to do, especially if you're new into the game. So I'm going to talk about my 3 things that I often will tell a player in order to become a better role player. Okay, so these are kind of universally for any type of role-playing game, not necessarily Dungeons and Dragons. They're really for any game out there. So my number 1 is your character should have some kind of personal goals. They want to achieve something, right? Now, there's the time and time again you'll hear like, oh, my parents died and I went out adventuring, right? But why did they go out adventuring? What is it they wanted to do? Now, you can flesh out the huge backstory and get all the details about everything that led up to today, but it still doesn't tell you what they want to achieve going forward. So if you have something you want to accomplish, like let's say you're a wizard of some kind and your parents sent you on this quest, right? Okay, fine, that's cool. Parents don't necessarily have to be dead in order to have a quest or something similar. Let's say there is a barbarian and there's a certain totem out in the world that he's been tasked with bringing back. Anytime you can have some of these kind of ideas and story pieces, the DM is going to have an easier time of building your backstory because it's clear what you're out there trying to achieve. So as long as you can have a personal goal, it becomes easier to role play that, right? You can go around and you can ask questions when you go out to places. You have a motive to talk to people other than just whatever storyline the DM is throwing out. And once you start getting those goals and those aspirations in play, you'll find it's much easier to get into character and stay in character. So that's tip number 1, have a personal goal. Number 2, this one is very, very often overlooked, and probably what I would say what makes Critical Role such a good overall show is be interested in your fellow players, right? It's not just you and the DM. Well, sometimes it is if you're playing a 2-player game, but most of the time you have other players, and what I find is that it's a one-on-one relationship with the players and DMs, and very rarely are the players asking questions to the other players. Now, I don't mean that in a way of, hey, what is your character doing? In character, ask, let's just say there's a ranger out there. In character, ask him, what happened to his family? Where is he going? What's the plan going on there? If you've got a druid, ask him about pets growing up. Get to know the player. Now, what that will actually do is 2 things. 1, it gives you a little bit better relationship in game, but 2, it forces the other people to also role play at least a little bit to be able to come up with the stories and pieces and parts behind that to find out what it is that made them the way they are. So the more you can role play, the better off it is. So that's tip number 2, get to know your other players in game. Tip number 3, put time into thinking about how your character would react in different situations. So what I'm talking about there is, you're in the real world, walk around and you're doing things, and you hear about all kinds of different things happening. There's a fight that breaks out at the local mall or something like that. How would my character react? Like, one of my favorite characters that I ran for quite some time was a barbarian mix, right? He had a drum he would use to intimidate people, and there's nothing like being able to go invisible as a bard, but then be able to pop out and rage in somebody's face as a barbarian. So thematically, it was a very strange mix, right? But with that kind of thing in mind, how would a barbarian react to this fight out here? Would he try to intervene, or would he try to, just watch and it's a show of, valor? What is he going to do? And that's the kind of thing you want to think about. And the more that you put time into thinking of how is this guy going to react to these situations, the better you're going to be able to role play that character as a whole. So that's tip number 3. Really pay attention to the world and think about your character in every social aspect you can. How would he react to this? Because once you can start getting into that mindset, then it's easier to turn that on and off as needed. And then bonus tip, one thing that makes it really fun is you have proficiencies throughout the entire game. How did your character begin to receive those proficiencies, right? So what are the storylines behind how you got a nature proficiency? If you're a ranger, that's pretty easy. But what if your ranger has medicine as a proficiency? Well, how did that happen, right? If you can put together a storyline for, what actually happened to gain your proficiencies, then once again, it's easier to decide how your character would respond and why. So those are my 3 tips plus a bonus tip for how to become a better role player. So definitely like and subscribe if it's your first time here. Let us know if you have any questions in the comment. Thanks again for watching, guys.